Welcome to another episode of China Update, where I provide you with the most up-to-date political, economic, and geostrategic analysis on the world's number 2 economy. My name is Tony. Let's jump in. Happy Wednesday, everybody. Today's video will focus on the big news from this week. As we anticipated in yesterday's video, on Monday and Tuesday of this week, the party leadership in Beijing held the annual Central Economic Work Conference, which set the economic policy agenda for 2024. The meeting has concluded and the long readout published. Now analysts and commentators around the world are debating what to expect next year. Let's examine some of the readout before moving to analysis. The readout admits that the country is facing economic issues. Quote, "The meeting pointed out that further promoting the economic recovery and improvement requires overcoming some difficulties and challenges. The main issues are insufficient effective demand, overcapacity in some industries, weak social expectations, and still numerous risks and hidden dangers. There are bottlenecks in the domestic big cycle, and the complexity, severity, and uncertainty of the external environment are increasing. It is necessary to enhance the awareness of potential dangers and effectively address and resolve these issues." End quote. Tellingly, the readout stressed that the economy must be balanced with national security considerations. Quote, "We must adhere to the positive interaction between high-quality development and high-level security." End quote. The document then lists 9 priorities for policy in economic work in 2024. 1. The construction of a modern industrial system with scientific and technological innovation. 2. Focus on expanding domestic demand. 3. Deepen reforms in key areas. 4. Expand high-level opening up to the outside world. 5. Continuously and effectively prevent and resolve risks in key areas. 6. Persistently and diligently work on agriculture, rural areas and farmers. 7. Promote the integrated development of urban and rural areas and regional coordination. 8. Deeply promote the construction of ecological civilization and green low-carbon development. And 9. Effectively guarantee and improve people's livelihoods. Much more of the flesh of this document will be seen as we examine its analysis and the debate surrounding its implications shortly. But first, let's briefly examine state media commentaries before moving to the international analysis. In a special editorial published today, party mouthpiece The People's Daily writes, "Currently, China's economic recovery is still at a critical stage, and further promoting the economic recovery and improvement requires overcoming difficulties. We need to enhance our awareness of these potential dangers and effectively address and resolve these issues." In a special editorial, the state-run Global Times put on a more optimistic face, expressing, "To further promote economic recovery and improvement, expectations and confidence are particularly important." We remember from the Politburo readout last Friday, the party prioritized the so-called management of social attitudes as key to achieving economic growth in 2024. Now let's move to the international conversation. Quote, "I do not think we can say from what is in the readout that the leadership has realized that they have gone too far with national security versus development, and so are recalibrating back to something more tolerable, especially for foreign investors. There is no indication of any massive stimulus in the works, but they will be doing more to keep the wheels from falling off while trying to upgrade the development model, including more support for real estate and measures to deal with the debt crises." End quote. Others agree, particularly on the second point. Ding Shuang, chief economist for Greater China and North Asia at Standard Chartered plc, expressed on the readout, quote, "The meeting showed that technology self-reliance is more important than in the past, and I don't see any signs of large-scale stimulus." End quote. Similarly, Jacqueline Rong, chief China economist at BNP Paribas SA, expressed, quote, "The measures sound rather traditional and nothing much was very creative. Investors' reaction to this might be rather plain because it takes an indication of a vastly stronger than expected pro-growth policy to trigger very excited responses." End quote. Tong Yi, a professor at Tianjin University of Finance and Economics, expressed, quote, "Judging from the wording in terms of fiscal and monetary policies, next year's focus will be on increasing the deficit rather than opening the floodgates of stimulus, which is a goal to prevent and resolve risks." End quote. Economist at France-based Société Générale said in a note to clients that though the overall tone of the conference was pro-growth, quote, "it is still not a call for massive stimulus." End quote. US-based China Beige Book tweeted on the readout that it signaled more stimulus, but not massive stimulus. And in a note to investors, Citigroup economists said that the key theme of the conference is that officials should, quote, rely more on structural reforms rather than cyclical measures to revive the economy, end quote. The consensus appears to be that Chinese leaders want to increase government spending and monetary support for the economy, but with a measured approach to stimulus then. Many economists also expect Beijing to anchor its growth target at around 5% in 2024. That's what JP Morgan economists think, for example. Cao Heping, an economist at Peking University, expressed on this point, quote, the meeting clearly indicates that in 2024, China will deploy a comprehensive set of fiscal and monetary policies to promote growth. If the intensity of the policies is appropriate, there is a solid foundation that we could even reach 5% growth in 2024, which would be very impressive given the sheer size of our economy. End quote. Now, if this is the case, even without massive stimulus, China would still see historically high fiscal deficits to continue into next year, growing debt, and no guarantee that its local fiscal and housing crises will be resolved. We remember home prices fell in October, and new investment in the sector is shrinking. We remember too that weak demand spending and bloated industrial capacity caused consumer prices in China to fall in November for the second straight month, deepening fears of deflation. Therefore, we will likely see another year of unhealthy economic growth. Some contrarian voices believe that Beijing will adopt a more conservative growth target because of the many headwinds facing the economy. The chief economist at Nomura, for example, expects China to aim for around 4.5% and believes that the actual growth rate could slip to 4%, again driven by fiscal deficits and unsustainable debt-fueled spending. It does appear that even though built on much debt and deficits, Beijing leadership believes that in order to engage in its economic and narrative struggle with the United States, it must continue to see these high growth rates. And that brings us on to our next topic, US-China economic competition. Hey everyone, if you enjoyed today's episode of China Update, I have a huge favor to ask. If you are able to subscribe and hit the like button if you have not already, this is the primary way in which this channel grows. It just takes a couple of clicks of the mouse, but it's a huge help. And for those who want to help keep the channel financially sustainable, this channel relies primarily on subscriber support to keep going. Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee links are in the description below. It's an honor to be able to produce these videos for you all every day, and I hope to continue growing this channel with your support. Thank you so much everybody for that support. Now, with the focus of today's episode on the party meeting discussing China's economic policy outlook, it seems fitting for the next update on US-China relations to examine the field of economic competition between the two powers. This week, the U.S. House Select Committee on the Chinese Communist Party published a bipartisan report on economic competition with the PRC called Resist, Prevent, Build, a Strategy to Win America's Economic Competition with the Chinese Communist Party. The committee report, which was signed by both House Democrats and Republicans, argues that China has carried out a, quote, multi-decade campaign of economic aggression, end quote, which has left the United States highly vulnerable in the event of a broader military conflict. The 53-page report included almost 150 recommendations that Congress and the administration could take to offset these vulnerabilities. It lays out a framework for unwinding some of the advantages, for example, afforded to China after joining the World Trade Organization in 2001. It says that it would, quote, restore U.S. economic leverage to ensure the PRC abides by its trade commitments, end quote. The report calls for China to be removed from its current Column 1 tariff clarification, which would undermine its most favored nation trading status and potentially levy much higher tariffs on all Chinese goods. In its executive summary, the report says that the U.S. economic competition strategy should have 3 pillars, which I am now quoting selected excerpts from directly. Pillar 1. Reset the terms of our economic relationship with the PRC. 1. The PRC's economic system is incompatible with the WTO and undermines US economic security. 3. The US lacks a contingency plan for the economic and fiscal impacts of conflicts with the PRC. More on this in a moment. 4. The PRC uses an intricate web of industrial policies, including subsidies, forced technology transfer, and market access restrictions to distort market behavior, achieve dominance in global markets, and increase US dependency on PRC imports. Pillar 2. Stem the flow of US capital and technology fueling the PRC's military modernization and human rights abuses. 1. American investors wittingly and unwittingly support the PRC's defense industry. 4. The PRC exploits the openness of the US research environment to steal US intellectual property. Pillar 3. Invest in technological leadership and build collective economic resilience in concert with allies. 1. The United States is falling behind in the race for leadership in certain critical technologies. 2. The PRC is gaining on the United States in the race for global talent. 3. By working with allies, the United States can increase US exports, reduce supply chain reliance on the PRC, and counter the PRC's economic and technological mercantilism. 4. The United States is dangerously dependent on the PRC for critical mineral imports. 5. The United States' dependence on the PRC for pharmaceutical and medical device supply chains poses a distinct national security risk. 6. Through its Belt and Road Initiative, the CCP has expanded its influence around the world and gained significant positions in key supply chains and strategic infrastructure, such as ports and space facilities. Here ends the selected direct quote. One recommendation within the report, which is getting a lot of attention, is that the Federal Reserve should be required to stress test US banks' ability to, quote, withstand a potential sudden loss of market access to China, end quote. It also said that the Fed should assess the impact on financial markets of sanctions against Chinese financial companies in the event of a conflict between the US and China. In a recent report on this very question, the US-based think tank Center for a New American Security said that the scale and interconnected nature of China's economy meant that negative impacts of sanctions would, quote, rebound globally through China's deep economic ties and nearly every country, including the United States, end quote. A study published by the Bank of International Settlements in October found that supply chains between China and the US have turned more complicated since 2021 as more trade routes rerouted through other places, especially Southeast Asia, Mexico, and others. Yet, many goods supplied to the US still originate from China, quote, implying limited progress with diversification, end quote. Frederick Newman, chief Asia economist at HSBC, speaking on the report, and others at the time expressed, quote, we have to recognize that there's ongoing mutual interdependence. China is quickly becoming a critical component supplier to the world after years of being largely an end-stage assembler, end quote. However, decoupling is happening in different ways. For example, according to a US-based Rhodium Group report, direct US investment into China hit a 20-year low of $2.8 billion last year. This year should see something similar too. Now, returning to the bipartisan report on economic competition, it concludes with the lines, quote, the United States now has a choice. Accept Beijing's vision of America as its economic vassal, or stand up for our security, values, and prosperity, end quote. The competition, economic and otherwise, between the US and China will only continue to heat up as we move into 2024, and we will continue to follow it closely here on China Update. That is today's episode. Thank you so much, everybody, for watching. Have a good Wednesday, and I will see you all tomorrow.